Okay, so today I thought I wouldn't show my face. The reason is that we're going to talk about an ink. I got a sample of Black Swan in English Roses. I got a sample from Tim. There's no real bottle to show you, just a sample file. Which is fine, of course, but I mean, it seems a little odd to talk about an ink if I can't show you anything nice. So just do what this is all about, and that is have a look at the ink. This is an ink, if I'm not mistaken, it was developed for flex pen, so it should give some nice shading. It's by Noodlers, and that's what we're going to be having a look at today. So, what we have is here is Noodlers Black Swan. I get a lot of review requests for this ink in English Roses. There is also an Australian Roses version of the ink, but this is the English Roses. Okay, so fine. Is in some roses, and then we have a fine mid. Let's go to a medium nib. Then we should have a look at a broad nib. And an metallic nib. Finally, I'll do a flex nib, and then we'll move on to some other tests. You see there's some railroad proneness. I am going slow. I'll just squeeze a drop of ink into the feed. It remains very difficult to make this ink right in a flex pen, which is a pity if it is indeed designed to be used in flex pens. Not absolutely certain of that, that's what I seem to remember. Because even when I go really slow, I keep getting this annoying railroading problem. Okay, so I can only make this ink railroad. I've done nothing strange with this pen. It is clean. It's just inked up in the regular way. But for some reason we keep getting railroads. A pity. Try it on some copy of paper later and see what that does. Alright, then maybe we should do a couple of passes and then we'll have a look at what we've got so far. 1, 2, 3. Alright, so what do we get? Well, a couple of things. Shading is quite nice, I would say. This is a well shaded ink. You can see that in the broad nib, for example. You take a probe thing here. You see some nice shading going on there. It's not excessive, but it definitely is quite visible. You see it here in the italic. Yeah, you even see it in the medium nib, and I guess you see it in the even in the fine nib a little bit. So that's really cool. I like that. It's a very odd color. I'm not sure what to make of this. It's not really a brown. It's not really a red. It's something peculiar in between. It's definitely not a black, and this is not a color I associate with roses, just from the top of my head, but it's fascinating. I'll do some fat writing. It's a pretty wet ink too, by the way. Which is why it surprises me a little bit that the flex nib is having such issues with it. There we go, some fat writing, and then I'll do some regular writing. I'll do a second pass. Come back to those in a second. First, we have to do that sad thing, make the ink disappear with the bastard brush. So far, what this ink reminds me of the most, I suppose, is ox blood, especially when you make it really wet. But, okay, we'll have a look and see whether I can come up with anything else. This is not entirely dry yet, so I think we should now check out that moment you have all been waiting for, the Tardif test. Smearable ink. It's easy to put in the paper with a knife, but it is a noodler's ink, so that was to be expected, right? Okay, and then I think, as we are, as we are still waiting, I think the best thing I can do is a brown benchmark. Now that's a beautiful benchmark. Look at that. I absolutely love it. I'm just wiping off my finger a bit here. There we go. Okay, so I think that we should do a third pass here. And I think we need to cheat a little bit. Just drawing that out a bit with a sheet of blotting paper. And then I think we need to have a look at the eyedropper of death. So, what can we conclude from all of this? Well, the ink can take water. It will definitely lose some of its color, but it remains legible, which is cool. The Tardif test shows us some of the shading you get from a light reddish brown to a much darker brown. This here, let me just grab a tissue. this shows the same thing. The ink is pretty much waterproof. I didn't expect that, but that's a nice bonus. And the brown benchmark, well, that's a lot of ink. Okay, so, and then, I mean, maybe we should have a look at these passes. So from a non-saturated to a highly saturated pen, it goes from a light brown to a much darker brown. It's a somewhat reddish brown, but that's pretty much all I can make of it. It's a brownish ink. Yeah. Okay. Let's do a scorecard, shall we? I want to make a change in the scorecard thing. I should probably make a separate video on that. But I want to use some grades to make this a bit more objective as far as possible. Cleaning. Well, you've seen that the ink is a little water resistant, so cleaning is not going to be the easiest thing in the world. I'm not expecting, I haven't done it yet, I can tell you that right now. I'm not expecting huge issues, but I am expecting a bit more issues than a water-soluble ink. I want to give this grades now, and I want to give grades from 1 to 3. The finer you make the scale, I think the less informative it gets. I mean, what's the difference between an ink that has a score of 6 or a score of 7 on a 10-point scale of ease of cleaning? So I wanted to use 3 points. You can get 1, 2, or 3. 1 is equal to Waterman Florida Blue. So that is an ink that can be solved by water. It's super easy to clean, there's no issues. 3 would be something like Noodler's Bay State Blue, an ink that is very hard to clean, that will stain plastics, etc. I think this ink is in between the two. So I would give that a 2 score for, well, it's not extremely hard to clean, it's probably not super easy either. Then we have bleed through. Well, when it comes to bleed through, we'll have to check that later. I want to use a similar system, where 1 indicates no bleed through whatsoever, even with the fattest nibs you got, and 3 is severe bleed through, even in normal writing. But we'll have to see, because I'm not finished yet. Then we have color. Well, how do we classify this? I would say a reddish brown. Then we have shading. Shading, again, I'm going to give a grade, and I want to use the grade 1 for an excessively well shaded ink, such as Noodler's Apache Sunset, and I want to use the grade 3 for an ink that doesn't shade at all. So that would be something like a black ink, say Noodler's X Feather, or well, maybe Gerbin Perle Noire, although that is a little bit more grey than the X Feather. So no shading whatsoever. Well, this I wouldn't call this an Apache Sunset, but that is a light ink. This is darker, so it may shade a bit less anyway. It does have very good shading. So, although it's not an Apache Sunset, let me think. Final decision. Yes, I'm going to give this. Okay, I'm giving this a 1 because it does shade really nicely, even though it is not excessive. Have I just disrupted my own grading system? Well, who cares? I'll make a video to explain my sort of reasoning behind this, and I'll probably do some demonstrations there too. Okay, flow. Well, flow is I suppose flow is either very good, so if I would give that a 1, it would be something like, again, Waterman Florida Blue. It's a Boy Scout of ink, it's very well behaved. 3 would be something like Noodler's Whaler Sepia. Usually I get serious flow issues with that ink, especially after a couple of days. So 1 would be very good flow, 3 would be very poor flow. This I would say is a 2, quite simply because no, you know what? This is actually very good flow. I'll give it a 1. The only issue I had was with the flex nib, but I think actually Florida Blue has the same. I think the issue is the sort of thinness of the ink. Okay, then we have feathering. Well, feathering is difficult to grade because most inks don't feather excessively, especially not on Rhodia. I would say that a score of 1 is something like Waterman Florida Blue, which, well, is, you know, it's very hard to make that feather. If you want, you could use Noodler's X Feather as a reference, which in principle doesn't feather at all. I think they're fairly well matched in that regard. A score of 3 would be an ink that feathers a lot. One of the inks I was thinking of was Ackerman Trèves Turquoise. I love that ink, but it is prone to feathering. That is in fact this ink, which I use for my notes, and as you can see, this is rhodia paper too, but as you can see, it does feather. So I'll try to incorporate that in my updated grading system video thing. I don't see a whole lot of feathering, but we'll have to hold this off until we got the cheap copier paper done. Drying time. Well, drying time is okay. It is not excessively long. It is not extremely short. I would say that Noodler's X Feather has a drying time of 3. It's kind of like a bulletproof ink, and that takes a long time to dry. 1, well, could be something, I guess, again, Florida Blue, that seems to dry fairly quickly. I would say this is a 2. It's somewhere in between. As you can see, this is still wet. The Tardif test is still wet, so it does take a time to dry, but it's not extremely, I mean, this is just a drop of ink on paper, but it does take a while to dry. Okay, and then finally we have waterproofness. When it comes to waterproofness, I think a good comparison would be, again, Waterman Florida Blue would be a 1. No, you know, let's call that, because I seem to be aiming towards 3 is sort of bad. So 1 would be something like Mont Blanc Midnight Blue, an iron gall ink. You can pour water over that, it will not disappear. 3 would be Waterman Florida Blue, which is can be solved in water, so it's just gone if you pour water over it. 2 would be something in between, and this is clearly a 1 because it seems to be completely waterproof, which is quite nice, and I appreciate that. I hope I didn't bore you to death, but I had to go through this new system. Again, I'll do a separate video, but because I haven't done that yet, I have to talk you through the first time. Okay, there we have it. Let's have a look at some cheap copier paper. To start with a fine nib. I have a fine nib right here. Question, what happened? Ah, here we go. Alright, a fine nib. Alright, and then a medium nib. Then we have broad nibbage. Italic nib. So on this paper I get the feeling the shading is a little bit less pronounced, but it is more absorbent paper. Maybe we should have a look at some flecks. Yep, railroading. I'm going to squeeze another drop of ink into the feed. Let's just see what that does. No, railroading straight away. I'll have to push the pen a little less hard. It cannot keep up with the ink flow, it just... Even when I really slow down, it just doesn't work, which is a pity. I don't like that. Okay, then a bit of fat writing, I would say. I already did the B, so how about I do the S here? BS for Black Swan, obviously. Obviously. Yeah. Alright, and then I'll try some more flex. This is going to be hellish. Bloody hell, I mean... Maybe it's just me. Tell me, does this ink work as a good flex ink for you? Let me know. Whoops! I just cut through the paper. Oh, it's bleeding out. Well, blotting paper to the rescue. This pad is getting more beautiful by the day, don't you think? Alright, put some of that here. Alright, well, let's have a look at this. Bleed through. Well, there is bleed through. I can see bleed through in the flex writing, I can see it in the italic writing just a little bit, I can see it in the broad writing just a little bit. This of course is not real, that's just a gunshot wound, and that's pretty much all there's to it. Feathering. I don't see a whole lot of feathering, to be honest. Not in the fat writing, and in the regular flex writing, well, a little bit. But it's not extremely pronounced, so I would say, I'm just going to put this somewhere it won't leak all over the place. Right, there we go. This is still wet, by the way. So let's finish up the scorecard. Feathering. Well, I don't see a whole lot of feathering. So I would say that the it's a 1 in feathering, even with very fat writing, etc. And then we have bleed through. Maybe we should look at bleed through in the Rhodia. I'm not expecting any. No, except for the brown benchmark, but that's not serious. And the writing, there's a little bit of shade through right there, but that's not really an issue. No, I think that this would be fine. So bleed through, I would say, is, well, depends a little bit on the paper, as always. I'm going to give this a 2. It's somewhere in the middle. There's definitely, when you use a broad nib, it's already on copy of paper, you'll just bleed through the paper a bit. So, there you have it. I'm not going to do a comparison with another ink today, because quite honestly I have no clue which other ink I can pit against this. It's a very interesting and odd color. I just don't know which ink I should compare it with. So, there you have it. Noodler's Black Swan in English Roses. I hope this was useful. Again, thank you Tim for sending us this sample. And I'll see you later. Bye bye.